to invite our keynote today, Lestari. Annie. Annie is a former Indonesian migrant domestic worker in Hong Kong and a migrants' rights activist. She is the current chairperson of the International Migrants Alliance, also known as IMA. IMA is the first ever global alliance of grassroots migrants, immigrants, refugee, and other displaced people. In 2016, she was the only grassroots migrant chosen to speak at the opening of the United Nations General Assembly on the large movement of migrants and refugees, bringing, for the first time ever, a grassroots migrant perspective to the UN floor. Please, please give it up to Annie.
Thank you. I would like to ask your consent for allowing me not to use my mask. English is my second language, and I've been struggling for 2 days to come here and jet lag, so I'm afraid I will be mumbling in English instead of giving the keynote, so apology for this. So let's start with our common chant, No to APEC! No to IPEF! People over profit. Good morning, selamat pagi in Indonesian language, buenos dias, magandang umaga, bonjour. Warmest greeting of solidarity from the International Migrants Alliance. We would like to express our deepest appreciation and salute to the Pacific Northwest People over Profit Coalition, where IMA USA is very proud member of the Alliance, for organizing this very important forum to unmask and expose the APEC and its agenda through its ministerial meeting and head of the state meeting, which both will be hosted by the United States of America. First, let me take this opportunity to introduce IMA and our work. What is IMA? IMA, as has been explained, is a broad alliance, first ever global alliance of grassroots migrants, immigrants, refugees, and displaced people that defend and promote the democratic rights and well-being of all migrants, immigrant, and refugee workers. It was established in 2008, and currently, we have 174 members in over 35 countries, with chapter in all region, global region, as well as national chapter. IMA is different from other global network because it is led by the grassroots migrants and refugees. 80% of our members are grassroots migrants and refugees immigrants community. IMA promotes the right and well-being of all migrant workers, refugees, displaced people, and their families. IMA exposes and opposes neoliberalism and imperialism as the root causes of forced migration and super exploitation of migrants and refugees today. IMA relies principally on the power of collective action or the mass movement of migrants and refugees. So IMA work focus on deepening the perspective and understanding on the root causes of migration and inhuman treatment toward migrants and refugees. IMA also focus on generating campaign, opposition, and actions against anti-migrants, anti-refugee, and anti-people policies. We strengthen solidarity and mutual support among migrants, refugee, and people organizations of various sectors across the globe. We establish support structure and network for migrants and refugees. we develop a genuine pro-migrant, pro-refugee advocacy and anti-imperialist network. In short, IMA is about building an international people movement of migrants and refugees in solidarity with people movement in host countries, home countries, and around the world. Distinguished members of the coalition and participants of today's forum, why your initiative to organize this forum and generate campaign against APEC is very critical and significant for all of us as a people movement, including migrants and refugee movement, not only within the USA, but also in the world. First, the world is now in the transition to the post-COVID-19 pandemic. But the crisis brought by the COVID-19 continue to greatly impact the life of people around the world. During and post-COVID, we witnessed many governments who have weaponized the pandemic to attack our rights and welfare. Our basic rights are gradually shrunk and eroded, from the right to work, to access health and other public services, to aid and assistance, to unionization and freedom of expression, and other basic human rights as stipulated in the international convention and treaties. In the US, we saw the disastrous response of the Trump administration to the pandemic, the needless death of the frontline and essential workers, and the growing racism, xenophobia, and polarization of the country. This include policies like Title 42, limiting asylum seeker process for migrants into the US, using the pandemic as justification for closing the door for asylum seekers. This continue and even expands under Biden administration. Second, the escalated repression is met with the growing resistance of oppressed people around the world as they take the matter into their hands by forging unity and solidarity among each other. From Europe to Latin America to Asia to USA, people unite and wage protests against anti-people government policies and corporate greed. From massive anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-immigrant right movement to the more recent call for racial justice and the end of police killing of black people, to the surging strike movement of retail, shipping, and transportation workers across the US. Today, millions are rising and challenging the exploitation and repression they face in their workplace, communities, and all the way to their homeland. They are met with government counter-insurgency program, militarized policing of their community, detention and deportation of migrant workers, and outright attacks on protesters. But people throughout the US, even beyond, press forward to fight for a better world. Third, despite the outcries and protests, today we witness the world leaders choose to deny the people concern and demand. From G20 meeting in Bali to G7 meeting in Japan to the upcoming APEC meeting in San Francisco, we witness the corporate attempts to save, even multiply, their profit, while our government choose to safeguard business interests over the livelihood and well-being of their peoples. The APEC talks, including the trade minister meeting here in Seattle right now, have happened mostly behind closed doors and with corporate lobbyists at the front line, instead of listening to the concern and voices of people impacted by APEC. The US in particular hopes to advance its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, through APEC and other bilateral talks to secure its dominance in the Asia-Pacific region over the rising economic power of China. As expected, U.S. militarization of the region, including expanded bases in the Philippines, Okinawa, Korea, and throughout Pacific, threatened to spark open conflict in the U.S. trade war with China. The APEC plans to achieve its vision through three drivers of their economic growth. Number one is trade and investment. Number two, innovation and digitalization. And strong and balanced, secure, sustainable, and inclusive growth. But we know the question is, growth for who? And the answer is very clear. Only very few will benefit from it. Sisters and brothers, let's now unmask the global capitalism or imperialism that has been behind the creation of APEC, WTO, IMF, World Bank, and other formations, name it. Before we zoom into APEC particularly, we need to understand what kind of system that we live in now and where we are going as society. We live in the era of global capitalism. It is an economy run by capital and driven for profit. Those who own capital or capitalists do not participate in the production. They are not everywhere in the factory and farm. But instead, they purchase and use the labor power of working class and sell their product. The cheaper the workers are, the better. So they can accumulate as much as profit as they want. On the other hand, a tiny fraction of the population own and control the means of production, such as machine, factories, and finance. This is the reason why, even in the early history of capitalism in 1800, when industrial revolution in Europe emerged, the workers, especially from poorer countries in Europe, have been used as a source of cheap labor for various industries in Europe, America, and Australia. They were mobilized to migrate and work in various industries. Without migrants, there will be no America and no Australia. We are the migrants. We are the generation of those migrants. In the US, the violent and exploitative movement of people included the capture of over 12.5 million African slaves, forced to work in mines and plantations for sugar, tobacco, coffee, cotton, and etc., and others. Indentured and contracted migrant workers were also recruited to work in agriculture, mining, and nation-building projects, such as construction of the road and railways, and later emerging industries like steel. Again, without migrants, there will be no more big building. In the development of the US capitalism, the genocide and displacement of indigenous people, the colonizing of land and resources, the exploitation and repression of workers and migrants, all went hand in hand to extract the maximum amount of wealth at the expense of workers and oppressed nations, including the Asia-Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. In the 1900s, capitalism reached its highest stage of monopoly capitalism, or we call it imperialism. Goods were mass-produced through collective labor with the aid of modern machine and man for the market. Just to give you a hips, in Indonesia, we produce Nike, but we don't buy Nike. We cannot afford of buying even one Nike with our salary as workers in the factories. But then you can buy Nike here in the USA and different part of the world. So again, develop who, by who, for who. The market has brought together people whom we know as migrant workers and refugee workers from distant part of the country or even distant part of the world to work in the factories, plantation, construction, fishing, tourism, caregiving, and other service industries. However, their inherent greed to accumulate profit comes with a price. Imperialism has experienced again and again crisis many times, resulting to the Great Recession in 1930s and World War I and II. But each time it happened, they developed new strategies to rescue themselves while extremely exploiting the workers and violating the rights of people around the world. And we believe this APEC meeting is important because new strategies will be developed to rescue themselves from COVID-19 crisis. In the 1970s, neoliberalism was introduced and accepted globally in 1980s. What is neoliberalism? It is an economic framework where governments intervene actively to stabilize and expand the capitalism, which is the market. It imposed a set of economic policy reform, namely liberalization, deregulation, and privatization, in order to protect the interests of the global elite. Over the decades, the capitalists gradually take over public assets and promote consumerism and debt. It also subordinates sovereignty, democracy, equity, social justice, and wreak economic violence against majority poor around the world. In 2016, the wealthiest 62 people on earth own as much wealth as bottom half 3.5 billion. And the top 1% were wealthier than the remaining 99%. Yet during the pandemic from 2020 to 2022 alone, the richest 1% had captured around half of the new wealth, or almost twice as much money as the bottom 99% of the world population. So they are not poor. They are not losing profit during COVID-19. We lose our livelihood, but they don't lose profit. Now, let's go to the Asia-Pacific region where I and many of you are coming from. What is the global capitalist interest over the Asia-Pacific and the role of APEC in the neoliberal agenda? Since the era of colonialization up to global capitalism, how many 100 years already? The Asia-Pacific has always been a target for plunder and exploitation. Because this region has immense wealth of natural resources with high population, which address the need for cheap labor and market for their product. Among migrants, we always say, if we don't need cash, we don't need to migrate. We can live by farm and raise chicken at the backyard. If we can pay school fee with our chicken, then we don't need to find dollar outside the country, and we don't have to be exploited. This is to show how rich is Asia-Pacific region. It's enough. It's more than enough to live. The current 21 member states of APEC are already home to nearly 3 billion people on the planet, account for 60% of global economy, and those hold tremendous collective potential for socio-economic development and interstate cooperation. This explains why plundering and controlling the Asia-Pacific region through APEC and other agreements is one of their key strategies to maintain their status quo. So what is APEC and its role in the system? APEC stands as Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. It actually started as a loose alliance with informal structure. Up to now, it's always informal. This means whatever decision they make are not legally binding. So people cannot ask accountabilities. That's why they don't have to open the door for people to participate. However, their impact to the life of the people within the region and beyond cannot be undermined. Since its founding in 1989, APEC aims to pursue capitalist growth through neoliberal globalization. Its major policies direction have mainly advanced the dominant interests of the developed countries led by the United States of America and Japan. Through the Bogor meeting in 1994 and Osaka meeting in 1995, APEC was able to convince its member to commit to the long-term goal of free and open trade and investment in Asia-Pacific by 2020. Maybe this is their agenda in this meeting because 2020 was COVID. So now they have to talk about this project. The members also agreed to keep agriculture as APEC agenda because it covers 60% of merchandise trade from the Asia-Pacific. Despite its seemingly voluntary process within APEC, it was able to deregulate, privatize, and denationalize more than half of the globe. It contributed to the reduction of tariff and other barriers to the international trade over time, which eventually destroyed the local economies, displaced people from their land and livelihood, and created political conflict in the region. I came from this history. My parent or my grandparent were a farmer. Because of the neoliberal inception in Indonesia, they lost their land. So they were forced to sell vegetable in the market. But the Asian financial crisis in 1997 crushed the market. So my family became bankrupt. I have no money to even continue my education. Then I was forced to be a migrant worker in Hong Kong. But this story is not myself. There are millions of women and men out there from the Asia Pacific who are surviving by being migrant and refugee. They migrate not only within the Asia Pacific, they also go beyond to the USA, Europe, Australia, and so on. Documented or undocumented. So now let's discuss how does the neoliberalism and APEC promote forced migration and how migrants and refugees are treated under the system. First, neoliberalism prevents the growth and development in many countries, especially in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and poorer part of Europe. It intentionally stuns the growth of many countries through economic control and plunder of natural resources, through unfair trade agreements, through corporate-driven investment rule, and through provision of loans that are oftentimes packaged as aid. It has been devastating the economy of low and middle-income countries. It creates a situation where many countries become a bottomless well of an army of unemployed and underemployed people originating from displaced farmers, indigenous communities, workers, urban, and other poor elements in the society. People desperate to survive who are eventually forced to sell their labor in foreign countries. This laid the foundation for the ruling classes in our countries, the countries of origin of migrants, to systematize the export of their unemployed labor to other countries in exchange for investment, remittances, and government earnings in order to keep their economies afloat. Sadly enough, our countries are so well dependent into global capitalism. They cannot see their future without investment and aid. And they are already falling into the trap. And that's the reason why our government are so weak and no longer have bargaining power to protect their own people. And plus, most of them are puppet of this system also. They capitalize on migration to prevent the explosion of public discontent, offer economic hardship, and denial of social services. Neoliberalism even promotes war as a perfect twin for neoliberal economic. Whether direct or by proxy, imperialists push the war agenda to profit from military deal, topple government that resists imperialist dictates, establish puppet fascist regime, and divide and further redefine sphere of influence. And as we all know, war and conflict drive millions to become refugees and asylum seeker with extreme vulnerabilities. Second, neoliberalism creates and perpetuates cheap and docile labor of over 270 million migrants around the world and over 60 million refugees in the world. This number combined, 330 million, are people whose life without final destination. However, migration is highly controlled, mobility of migrants is highly restricted, and the human right of migrant and refugee is denied for the sake of super profit. Migrants are mainly recruited to perform 3D jobs, dirty, difficult, and dangerous, in construction, agriculture, mining, and other service sectors. Through the visa policies and border control, most governments bind the migrants to certain conditions, mainly working for one employer or one company only, prohibition to change job and employer, repatriation when contract is terminated or finished, limited or no legal opportunities to settle in host countries, isolated in certain accommodation and dormitories, and so forth. There are so many regulations above migrants, and if once we break, we are becoming criminal. At the same time, refugees are given very limited access to employment, health, and education. When refugees gain access to work, for example, however, the type of employment that the refugees can perform does not fit to their actual skills. A lot of Syrian migrants, refugees, are highly skilled professionals, but what they can do, they can only be a cleaner and Starbucks workers, and they don't get recognition to their actual profession as a doctor, engineer, and others. So this is how they de-skill and degrading us. When even migrants from our countries, like Philippines, when it is highly educated, what they can do? They can be a domestic worker only. Only one employer forever, 20 years, 30 years, until the day they expired and go home. That's the only thing they can do. You cannot be even teacher overseas because you are not recognized. Doesn't mean you cannot do the work. They just don't want to acknowledge that. Why? They want to keep you as super cheap, super cheap workers for their economy. Most migrants are excluded from minimum wage legislation and paid as cheap as 1/3 of the local wage of the local workers. They are excluded from labor legislation and other laws without working hours and food regulation, and often blamed whenever crises arise. During COVID-19 pandemic, for example, which is just very recent, many migrants and refugees are stigmatized as coronavirus carrier and spreader and excluded from relief and benefit. Women migrants in particular are designated in stereotyped jobs that are considered as lower skilled and lower paid, such as domestic work, garment industry, hospitality sector, caregiving, job implantation, entertainment, and healthcare. Very low pay, mandatory live-in, long working hours, denial of rest and holiday, denial to change employment and right to residency. Verbal and sexual abuse are very common problem encountered by women migrants in their workplaces. Every time the global capitalist system experiences crisis, it is migrants, the migrant workers, who are among the first to be sacrificed through massive layoff and deportation, arrest and imprisonment, stigmatization, and discrimination. Under very repressive migration regime and slogan of migration for development, the already undervalued migrant labor become even cheaper, docile, and disposable. Among migrants, we wonder why this country deport migrants in thousands, even millions. We thought they don't even need migrants anymore. Maybe now they will employ local workers. But we are so wrong. They deport those millions to recruit new ones. The more higher skilled, the younger one, the more docile one, they might be master or undergrad or master graduate. But when they become migrants, they are as paid as low as high school student. This is how capitalism earn their super profit. This is how they use migration as their scheme to earn the so-called super profit. So sisters and brothers in struggle, so what should we do now? What are our tasks and responsibilities? We are the today's generation. The fight is in our hand. So it's up to us what to do for our future generation. After a very long explanation, now we can conclude that our common enemy is the capitalism. While APEC and other formations are just the tool. They are behind all those faces. But we have to face them in order to fight the real enemy behind those formations, right? So it's important to fight APEC, W2, and so on, and unmask them, expose them. Therefore, we must link and raise our campaign against APEC with our long-term struggle against capitalism. There are many believe we fight now, we can win tomorrow. The truth is not. Capitalism has been existing since 1800. Our ancestor, our father, grandfather, great-grandfather, they already fight against capitalism and still here. Doesn't mean we lose. But it takes many years to topple this enemy. And we have to be very, very patient, step by step, to achieve all those targets. So while we are ambitious, we also have to be very, very patient and doing it correctly, step by step. We might win some now. Maybe our children might win more, will win more. But at least our future generation doesn't have to fall under the same system, right? We know that the current system tries to divide the division, to create division and drive wedge between local and migrant workers. However, we know that all workers, regardless whether you are local or migrants, whether you are what nation or countries, we are all standing in the losing end. Today, we have seen that what workers, both migrant workers and organized labor, can win when they build the power they need and act in militant solidarity. Significant advances in the workplace, including important wins such as 8 working hours, the end of the child labor, the advancement of some agricultural and women workers' rights from the US, point to the power and possibility of what we can achieve when we come together, especially in genuine international solidarity. We must build upon these victories to face the challenges of today's. Against the deepening exploitation of all workers, the forced migration of hundreds of millions of displaced people all over the world, and oppression of people and nations struggling to determine their own future and build a better world. Today, we must weave together the struggle of grassroots migrant and refugee, peasant movement, women, and workers in all industries and countries, the struggle of indigenous people and nations for true liberation, and the fight for a healthy planet and future for all of us. The enemy of the people is represented in the forum like APEC, and our resistance is not only justified, but necessary now more than ever. To fight and win against neoliberal scheme like APEC, we need grassroots movement in the millions from all of our countries. linked together in solidarity so that when APEC meets from Thailand to the US to Peru next year, we will all there at every turn to assert people's voice of resistance until APEC is no more. Sisters and brothers who continue to fight, I bring this message of international solidarity to your coalition call for people over profit, from migrant and domestic workers from Indonesia and Hong Kong, from the more than 170 member organizations under International Migrants Alliance in over 35 countries, and from the struggling grassroots people in the Asia-Pacific region. With each victory, we build our power together for the long struggle ahead, for a better world we all need. We can win, and we are here with you in the struggle. Long live migrant and refugee struggle. Long live workers' movement. Long live international solidarity.
Long live international solidarity! Long live international solidarity!
Thank you so much to our keynote, Annie. We learned so much in just 30 minutes. We are going to continue to learn from her. There is an opportunity for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, start to think about it. We're going to take questions at any of these, at the bottom of these stairs. So please come down if you have questions. Probably only have time for 2 or 3. When you have a question, please raise your hand so I know that you're not just passing through. But just some logistics as people start to think of questions. Please take a look around you. If there is someone wearing a green sticker, it's a circle, make sure that they are not in any of your photos that you're taking. There are documenters that are assigned to take photos for the entire weekend. They will be blurring out the faces of folks who have these green stickers, but in your own personal photos, please be aware of your surroundings to keep other people also safe and make sure that their consent is taken. So are there any other questions for Annie, our keynote? And we can bring the mic as close as we can. Ooh, okay, question. Do you want to say it into the mic?
Thank you. How do we continue building intergenerational solidarity?
Yeah.
It's a big question, right? I mean, all movements have the same issues of intergenerational activism and movement. I can only share from our experience within migration and Asia Pacific. Well, it has always been challenged. It really requires a lot of efforts, but it's important to see the external condition that make generation different from us before and after. For example, even among the migrant workers, organizing people who are as young as 20s is not that easy as our time. There are people who are like AI already, right? Their brain is like machine. And they have different type of culture, different type of hobby, they have different type of liking. And talking about activism or issues is also requiring a lot of what I call it investigation. So I think learning from existing experience really we have to see the external factor that develop the generation, but beyond that is also the question of the movement, how to transmit the knowledge that we learn. And I think a lot of movement, I mean, I really appreciate the indigenous movement where they actually transmit the knowledge through parents, children, and so on. It become known to them that their ancestors are experiencing and that. So maybe they will not be as militant as we are, but when the time comes, they know what to do. So I think it's not like we tell them what to do. They know they should be the one knowing what to do. It's their world, you know. The 20s, like the future is the new generation world, but then it's our responsibility to tell them what, like the global capitalism. They will not know this until we tell them. But in terms of the format of the action, honestly, the new generation, in my experience, they are very innovative. They use Instagram, TikTok, and so on. I don't even know how to use that. Something like that. But they do communicate all this message. The important for the older generation is to pass the knowledge, but not to impose, you should follow my way, or, you know, because our way doesn't work for the newer generation. Yeah, I think that's one thing to learn, but I believe there is really a need for the movement to have that kind of conference, how we are actually transmitting knowledge as a movement, as an activism to the newer generation. I believe different part of the world in Latin America has so much knowledge that is not even documented. Yeah, but if there is a conference to particularly talk about that aspect, will be the best. Yeah. So I give you a new project.
Do we have any other questions? We can take probably.
Wow, so many
Yes.
hands. I'm so afraid.
I don't know if the mic will reach you, but if we meet halfway.
I'll just get them.
What do you recommend we do with all the surveillance and policing, the militarizing of control of enslaved and immigrant or refugee people, so that we can protect them? And there's a real contrast. In California, near the Mexico-US border, there are people who are being tortured, murdered, children being taken to be used as sex slaves. And right next to that are wealthy white people who are walking on the Pacific Crest Trail with people so happy to give them water and food and shelter and transportation. And all this free access for folks who are already pretty wealthy, while they're destroying the water, while they're poisoning people, while they're preventing shade for folks who are otherwise the same.
Well, I will lift some of the actual action that the U.S. Militarization against migrant and refugee can do. I believe there are so many local attempts here, but I just want to reflect on my own personal reflection on how, as a migrant, we see all these issues. When I migrate to Hong Kong, for example, my target is only 4 years, because I thought working 4 years, saving money, I can go home, pay all the debt, and put some money for my education. But the story is very different. I face exploitation, and then the prices are going up. So then I don't realize I work more than 20 years already. So the question I have, why I raise this issue, is because it's the same question for migrants. For you, it's about local to migrants. For us, like, how long should we work as migrant? Can we go home now? It's so tiring, to be migrant. Every day, this is what we experience. It's so exhausting and extremely dehumanizing. But then we have to accept that. We become docile because we feel there is no option. But then, again, it comes to the second question, why there are no option to go home? Why the migrants and refugee, quote unquote, willing to stay in that kind of situation? So then that's the time I learned about global capitalism and how it used the migrant labor, refugee labor as source of, cheap workers. So it's not a question of economic crisis. It's a question of political crisis. That's why we don't agree that migrants and migration is economic issues. No, it's a political issues. Because without migrants, there is no capitalism. So if they keep migrant and refugee that way, always in the camp, always isolated, always exploited, it's intentional. That's why among migrants movement, we keep asking ourselves, why it is so difficult just asking for living wage, asking for a day off, asking for mass and social benefit during COVID. We are suffering. But why it's so difficult? We just don't ask $100, maybe we only ask $10, but they will not even give it to us. And we keep asking ourselves, now, unless we link that to the global capitalism, which is for profit, then the migrant themselves will never have the answer. That's the reason why IMA takes seriously to study the global capitalism, because that's the only way for us to understand the root causes of our suffering. The next question is what to do. So what to do is two things. One, within the migrants platform, we have to fight like the workers step by step. Maybe for you all, you want to save migrant and refugee, but in the eyes of migrants, it's not about rescuing them from all this condition. Maybe just little relief, because their intention is to earn money so they can send money back home. So if you rescue them and send them back home, you actually fail them to get their target, to get livelihood. So it's a very tricky question. One side, you really want to do a lot, but the other side, are the migrant ready to pick up all those consequences? So very important to communicate, like how do you want us to help? If they just need water, maybe that help them with water. But beyond that, I think what as a community and movement can do is really to expose the system. And again, expose doesn't mean we can change things right away. But then when people are aware on certain situation, the government will be very, very careful. Yeah, at least they will do a little improvement in their treatment. Doesn't mean they will remove everything, because again, migration policies is actually the source of their profit. Losing it means they will earn less. Controlling it means they earn more. So you are fighting, the source of the revenue for the enemy. So it's not going to be easy fight. This is when we realize how the migration is well connected with global capitalism. So that's why IMA take it as a political and long-term fight. Fighting for migrants' rights means fighting capitalism. So yeah, just if any friends within the US, especially IMA US, I know you have a lot of program to expose the border control, the detention and deportation of migrant and refugee. Please help answer what concretely they can do.
I think we have one more question that we can take. Do you have a question? Yes, okay.
How do you balance organizing migrants as a broad sector, and then migrants from specific countries, and then migrants who have all migrated to one country?
It's also the question that the UN cannot answer. We have, I meet a lot of the UN officials, the UN special rapporteurs on human rights, on migrants, and so on and so on. And whenever they come up with report, they really rely on the upcoming submission. They say, this rapporteur even say, I cannot go around the world asking migrants. They are nowhere to be seen. Yeah? It's not easy to reach them, which is true. Because migrants are highly isolated in farm, in factories, in domestic work, and so on. Of course, you will not meet them unless you go to their workplace, but doesn't mean when you go to their workplace, they can talk to you. That means they will lose the job. So, of course, if the UN cannot even do that, what the government will do, they will not even do that. So this is the reality why the issue of migrants and refugees is always under the radar. And it's not only by accident, it's intentional. One, they intentionally create migration where it doesn't mix. I give you example. In Hong Kong or in Asia, they intentionally recruit domestic workers only from certain countries. Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and to some extent, Burma. But when it comes to construction workers, they will recruit from South Asian countries, India, Pakistan, Nepal, and so on. And really wonder us why. There are so many Indonesian men who are happily to work as construction workers, and later on we realize it is part of their control mobility. They want to make sure you don't mingle, have children, and insist to stay in that countries. But if you marry internationally and across countries as a contractual worker and contractual worker, you can never unite. Because I have a friend who is married Bangladeshi. They met in Singapore, the other one domestic worker, the other one construction. And the husband, who is Bangladeshi, worked throughout their life, and the woman is there in Indonesia. He cannot sponsor her because the income and the visa doesn't allow, but neither he can go to Indonesia because in Indonesia, Bangladeshi worker in Indonesia, what are you going to do? You are not even investor. You are not welcome in this country. So they can never meet in the past 15 years. They are married, having children. So this is the kind of control. That's why we say migration today is very, very, very cruel, very, very exploitative. It is not only economic exploitation, it is our superhuman right to have families and children that is being exploited. They make sure you don't reproduce generation they don't want. See? So this is one thing. That's one of the reality why migration is heavily, heavily controlled, and they make sure that you don't meet not only by nationality but even by workplace. That's why one of the challenge, even within one country, is how to bring in together the grassroots migrants. Don't bring the migrants, just the leader. It's already very difficult. They are fully working. They don't have proper visa. They cannot travel. So the movement in IMA rely to people like me who is documented to travel around the world. Otherwise, no one can speak everywhere on behalf of the migrants and refugees. And this is one of the reasons why they intentionally do not put migrant refugee grassroots in any forum. So when they talk about migrants, they talk to who? Oxfam. When they talk about refugee, they talk to who? Amnesty International. Right? So this is the reason why IMA, even we don't like the United Nations, we go there. Not because we love them too much, but because we want to assert our position within the decision making. So this is the reason why IMA was established, because we want to bring in together. We say we are globalizing the movement of migrant and refugee because we know they are very localized. Once you are stuck somewhere in Germany, you are there forever, for the rest of your life. The only thing they know is their local issues. But the migrant and refugee should know whatever happened to them is already globally designed. If they don't link to that global design, they miss the point. They are fighting all their life until to the point they are so tired, but they feel the fight is useless. No, it's not useless. So they have to know that global context. But then we also have to grounding the global, because all this global talk happened there on the above. They intentionally do not tell us what happened. All the migration discussion is somewhere in Geneva or in New York. If you don't fly out, then you know nothing. And if you don't read English, sorry, you will never know what is being discussed. So that's the reason of the role that IMA is playing, to bring in together movement of migrant refugee across culture, across region, country, sector, to come together and find common unity. And in the end of the day, what I find, regardless of our nationality and sector, we fight the same. We experience same problem and we fight the same enemy. So regardless of our job. Yeah. Okay, thank you for the question. We can continue
round
the
of
sharing
applause.
during the lunch.
Thank you so much, Annie, for your powerful words. I want to point out that Annie, as she's mentioned, is a grassroots migrants organizer, and she's actually still fundraising for her international organizing and movement building internationally. So she travels internationally year-round. So if you would like to support Annie's incredible work, please visit the EMA table and donate. There's also some IGPs that are really cool to buy. You can get a t-shirt. So please support that work. And another round of applause for Annie. Thank you so much for coming here.
Amazing. Wow. Yeah, really kicked it off for the People's Summit. So we are going into a 10-minute break. Please come back at 11:01, and then we'll go into our panel. So please take a 10-minute break. 11:01, return then. Thank you.